Hey family, what's good? It's your boy Garden McGarden. You already know what time it is. We about to look at some worms. Cause one of the things that I always do on the garden or in the garden is I maintain worms. I'll tell you the story about how I started maintaining worms. Okay, so my housemate at the time, he has his own business called Naturecraft. Shout out Naturecraft, and he works at people's houses. He builds fences, chicken coop, just general handyman stuff around the house. And a lot of the times they have things that they're trying to get rid of, things that he can take to the scrap yard. He charges them, a delivery to dump some of the stuff away. And but sometimes some of the stuff he gets pretty cool, like a worm bin. So we had the worm bin. It was sitting on the out in the back for a little while, and I was like, every time I was weeding, I'll be finding these juicy worms. I said, what if I just put them in the worm bin and I'll put some dirt in there? So I did that, and then I put some food in the worm bin on the top level. Actually, I didn't really know much about it at the time, so I just put food on kind of a little bit on all of the levels, but it didn't matter because it was pretty easy, and the worms just started multiplying, and you see now it's just filled to the brim with worms. Well, why even have worms in the first place? Well, the initial reason was because as a gardener, they break down materials into compost very, very nicely. Also, they create worm tea at the bottom of the worm bin that you can collect. It's liquid. It also it's high in nitrogen, so it's good for vegetating plants, and I use it as a fertilizer for my outdoor plants. And so you see all these paper products. The shredder that I use this shredder as bedding for the chickens, and I also use it as bedding in the worm bin. It was up until I got this paper shredder. I would just see how I'm breaking down this Fruity Pebbles box. I would just break it down and tear it up and then lay it in the worm bin, and then over time they'll break it down. But if you shred it for them, it's even that much nicer. And what I've started to do is shred it, put it in the chicken coop, so it's kind of replaced the bedding hay that we used to buy. So they use that, they poop on, get their waste material on that, and then I put that in a compost bin afterwards, and that breaks down really nicely. And so it's actually served multiple multiple functions, bedding for the chickens and the worms. So I found this list online of what do worms eat. I see coffee beans, eggshells, rotting vegetables, leaves, manure, dirt, animals, paper/box. And yeah, I pretty much put all of those things in the worm bin, and I've never had any problems. I will also use, obviously, so the rotting vegetables stuff, we have a compost, little mini food scrap in the kitchen, and so I'll supplement that with just anything that I find outside. So if I find leaves, if I find any kind of discarded fruit or something, I'll put it in there. And so you see, that's just all scrap food that's just breaking down. Banana peels in there. There's the kitchen compost, and you can kind of see the moisture in that compost from the kitchen. I definitely, over time, I've been putting more water and paper products in the composter, because one thing that's important for the worm bin is that moisture, is just making sure that everything in there is moist, because they breathe through their skin, and it's just very important that everything they need constant moisture at all times, not like waterlogged, but moisture. And so you see me there just kind of mixing the food up. It doesn't, I mix it up so it's kind of more even topographically. There's not too many peaks and valleys in there for them, so it's just kind of even. And yeah, they'll crawl around there. Once you start, you'll see, like as you saw in the first shot, you see them at the beginning, and then because they're sensitive to light, they will get paralyzed if they stay in the light too long. They're always trying to go and bury themselves. You see me putting the bedding on top. And so, yeah, that's pretty mellow. They'll enjoy that, and then you see me applying some moisture there. That's just the water that was already in the system. There's like a little faucet on the bottom that I can turn, a little spigot that I can turn on and off, and it'll have the water flow through the system or not. And so I'm adding supplemental water from elsewhere into the system now. As you can see, we're adding more water. So like I said, that just making sure that water, they live through all the seasons, winter, summer. It's never been a problem, but you just have to make sure it stays moist. There you can see the spillway. That's where you can collect the worm tea from. It's rich in nitrogen as it passes through the bin. So usually I leave the faucet open so that it doesn't flood in there. The water just runs through. The only time I'll turn it off is when I remove that green watering can under there. So I just leave that underneath there with the faucet open, so any water that I run through the system just goes through it and keeps it moist down there without kind of pooling up or pooling in at any point, so it's allowed to get out. And then that's all fertilized. It's all essentially, worm tea, what you would call that. So yeah, you can see inside, you see the kind of pieces of multicolor. That's that shredded paper that I just put in there as the bedding. And they're at home. You see there's a lot of them in there. Oh, look at the wormos. They're everywhere. So yeah, they like it. They're thriving. At any point, like, I can take worms out of this pile and I can move them all around the garden. And so we essentially kind of have worms everywhere. So, as well as being good at fertilizing, breaking down compost, I mean, they're also snacks for the chickens. And we have so many of them. There's a lot of worms. So we let them go, I don't let them go into this bin, but I'll transfer the worms into other places and let them kind of thrive in there, and almost kind of have mini worm bins around the garden, because I'll stack pots and grow seeds in there to grow like kind of forage for them. And then it turns out that worms just end up living in there and kind of cycling through those stacked pots, as well as having some sprouts grow for them to eat. So they'll go in there, scratch it up a little bit, eat some worms, eat some forage, and then I can reseed it, and then the cycle continues. And by the time they've come back to eat it, the worms can repopulate. So, I mean, the fact that they grow so fast and so quickly, just depending on how much food you can provide for them, and the amount of scraps that it's just me and Changi and in the house. So, I mean, we definitely create enough scraps just between the two of us in a week to keep the worms alive and thriving, So this is one of the places I'll transport them to, and you see there's a bag there, a spent bag. I'll fill that with dirt and just put food in there also. And just over time, worms will just populate those areas. This is another place where I'll transfer worms to. And so I'll open this door and let them go through it. And as you can see, they go pretty hard. Those chickies, I try not to open it too much because they'll go so hard, they'll pretty much empty the whole thing. So I have to try to monitor it. I ended up leaving it open, so they went all the way through it and I had to repile. But anything that they scratch out of that area, I'll just repile it on top. So anything that they've scratched out there, I'll just end up coming through, scraping it up, repiling on the top. So it's a nice little recycling system. It's like anything that was on the bottom goes to the top, and things that were on the top get recycled down to the bottom. So the chickens kind of help me just turn the compost really easily and really quickly. And the thing is, however many worms they eat in there, it's not really a big deal, because as long as I just repile up the dirt and provide more food and it stays moist, provide more leaves, I mean, that pile is going to always be of interest to worms as long as I keep it moist. So sometimes in the hottest months I'll water it, but I haven't really watered it for a long time. The one good thing is, though, that if you keep the top covered, it will retain moisture pretty well. So even in the hotter times, compost piles are a good way of retaining kind of moisture in there, and having paper products in there too, and just keeping things damp and moist, and then keeping it dark in there, and by covering the top if you can. I'll put bags over the top. That's why you kind of saw that bag with soil on the other one. It's also a way of keeping it dark on the top and keeping predators who might come and try to pick off the worms off the surface. It makes it hard to do that. So it's just kind of a way of protecting them, keeping it dark so they feel safe in there. And then the darkness, it also helps retain the moisture so that it's more of a self-sustaining system. that I can kind of contribute to here and there when it gets drier. But most of the time, because of the area we live in of the country, it rains pretty decently, and the weather in the fall and the winter months, it'll stay very wet. So it tends to not be a problem. But we have a few weeks in the summer where it's pretty dry. Like right now, you can see by the dryness of the paper how dry everything is right now. I mean, it's still like has more moisture than things surrounding it right now, but it's still pretty dry for this time, for what you can usually expect in there. So they'll just pick through all of that, and I'm kind of helping them along by picking the big pieces of paper out. But you can see they have kind of gone through and pecked it all. And then over time, that paper is decomposing. And then you can also kind of see why that paper shredder is probably a little bit more pleasant to deal with than these big pieces of paper over time. Like because they're broken down, it'll be easy for the chickens to just scratch and peck through it rather than the paper, which can kind of create a barrier, which sometimes I like because sometimes I don't want them to pick all the way through the compost pile. So I will layer paper in there, and it's actually a good technique of composting anyway to layer papers. But you see, they'll go through the top. If I keep that door closed, they just go through the top. Oh, look at little Leggies wants a pet. Well, thank you for watching and checking out my little video on worms. We'll talk soon, family. Love ya.